Okay, maybe we will review everyone now, because now it starts to get good to hear.
Oh, one way you could do it, if you want to mute yourself when you're not talking and have no control about your muting and unmuting, the way you do it is in the lower left corner of the screen, find the button called Mute, Unmute. You can mute yourself, and then you have more individual control about being muted and unmuted.
Okay. If we mute you, you cannot unmute yourself. If you mute yourself in this way, then you have control of when you can unmute yourself. Somebody, yes.
Here's some noise coming from somewhere. If you don't mind to push the mute button on the lower left.
There we go. Okay.
Higher.
Okay, got it. Great.
It sounds better. Fantastic.
Good, good. Okay, so in the Q&A sessions, what we like we did the last time for the second module, what we're going to do is speak for a little bit, Thomas and I, kind of integrating and doing a recap of this module, and then we will open it up for questions, dialogue, responses, comments, and hopefully we can have a free-flowing engagement with together about this module on nation soul and shadow and world soul. And so just to recap, we started this program with two sessions, one about looking at globalization from a cosmocentric perspective, really looking at the fact that human beings do or have been a force on this planet that has moved across it and been globalizing for a very long time. We are at a particular point in that process in which we're able to do things like this, which is amazing, and be able to come together in different places, from very different places, to see each other and to connect. And at the same time, the technologies and capacities that are enabling us to do this are part of a system of knowledge and political power and economic power that is leading to the environmental destruction that has been a part of the colonization of peoples and cultures on this planet. So it's obviously very double-sided, and we're at a point where I think one of the questions is, can the ways that are potential for us to come together, can we begin to utilize those as a force against the mechanisms and ideologies and fear and so forth that is constantly work to pull us apart. So we went from there to speaking about prior unity, about the fact that fundamentally reality is one, consciousness is one, and that is a ground to adopt the assumption or presumption of prior unity in conversation and in engagement with each other opens up a slightly different angle than that which we're usually accustomed to in having conversations. It allows us to hold on to the deepest truth that there is only one humanity, even though we have very, very different faces, cultures, languages, experiences on this planet, and experiences that come from our interactions with each other. And then in this last module, we had Wolfgang Aurose with a little bit of help from his partner Soleil, speaking about the soul of nations, and about and I don't know if you noticed, but he was also speaking about the goal of world soul, that is something that doesn't exist yet. There isn't, and I think that programs like this are one effort to try to give us, to begin to bring about a recognition of an awakening to a sense of world soul, which would be just like you feel, you know who you are and what your personal history is, and you have a connection with a national identity that is either conscious or unconscious, being aware of oneself as a part of this entire world, and the soul demands on us at this point would be the emergence of a world soul. So we'd like to speak some about what he was speaking about, some of the important points in relationship to the nation soul and shadow work that Wolfgang brought forward, because I think there was a great deal of subtlety in his presentation, and he often said things just once that were quite profound, like, oh, that's one that we want to really pay attention to and really think about. I think he's speaking about cultural evolution or national, the evolution of our identities by us as individuals taking on and being responsible for the attributes and soul and shadow qualities of our nations. And one of the things that he was saying was that it's this working, as he said, homeopathically as individuals, but consciously connecting to our national identities that can make that can bring about an evolution at a consciousness level, which is an evolution at the level of subjective experience. As he said, this is an experience. It is something to be experienced. It is a part of our inner attitude, our inner sense of who we are, rather than something purely intellectual or something that at this point is engaged with activities in time and space and in the world.
Which is maybe also a good point to bring it to an experiential level, as we are talking right now. Because as you kind of laid out again, the journey we went until now from the global context, from the priority and the nation soul, and as we just look into each other's faces here on this call, and see each other as Elizabeth and I are talking right now, and we will be in a conversation for the next 90 minutes here. There is a growing consciousness of this global process that we are together in. We, this group of people on this course, and as we heard in the last calls we had together, there is also a growing sense of this prior unity. We talked about it how just being on screen here and being in conversation, there is also a growing sense of something that not just 20, 30, 40 individuals meeting, or there's something happening as a whole as we are talking right now. And I think it's always important to also relate to this on an experiential level, not just on a cognitive level, and just to go into one's own experience. And at least it's my experience seeing you guys that there's a whole opening up just by myself leaning into this. And then hearing Wolfgang speaking last time and having conversations in the small groups since, and having contemplated about this, and at least we had quite some conversations about this soul of the nation. There is a growing sense, and I'm looking forward to hear from all of you if this is a shared sense, that as we are talking right now, there's not only this global process, there's not only awareness of this oneness of consciousness, there's also, as I see you, and as having still in mind what Wolfgang brought to us, with every one of us, there's a whole cultural background, a soul background that is not just you, me as an individual, but as I'm talking, my Austrian background, my Austrian Germanic background is part of me. As I hear you, I not only hear an individual, of course it is an individual speaking, but through this individual there's a whole door opening to a cultural soul background. There's a whole cultural depth opening that has more than the individual, which is very much what Wolfgang was tapping into. And I guess, and I'm really very curious to hear about your group conversation, that this must have been also part of the experience in your smaller conversation, when you were meeting people from very different cultural backgrounds, and you were meeting as a group of a small handful of people, but also all the backgrounds was part of this conversation as it is. And to be aware of this allows us also to envision, if we hold this together, and we hold this together on a global scale, as we try to do this on a course on a global scale, there's something of a world dimension of a soul opening up. Mm-hmm. And maybe this course is one part of a homeopathic attempt to work with the world soul, holding all these dimensions, the individual, the history, the oneness, the nation, as one living multidimensional whole. And to dive into this is the attempt of this course. And Wolfgang really brought up an important part of it, because this is particularly true, I think, for people coming from a postmodern context, that we tend to ignore to quite a degree, that we are also made by a cultural background. We are so identified that I am an individual. I, me, myself. I'm not my Catholic upbringing. I'm not my Austrian national. I'm me and myself, and that's part of the strength of also the postmodern culture, to really emphasize the individuation process and be aware of this I sense in a way that maybe humanity was never aware of in this degree, but to, in this process, not forget or awaken to the context that we are a product and a reality of a cultural soul background that has to be held in the whole process.
Right, and I think, it's interesting because, postmodern, which would mean, in many ways, the generations after the 60s, or in Europe, they usually refer to it as the 68 generation, meaning in the boom period after the Second World War, after the Vietnam War, really, that this period of that was really focused in the West and really moved around the world around personal and social liberation, and that from that position, it's like there's been a lot of an emergence of a lot of different psychotherapeutic, spiritual but not religious ways of developing self and cultivating one's own soul, one's own soulfulness, and yet it's interesting that Wolfgang uses the word soul with this aspect of our identity that is linked to our nation culture. It's because that quality that when we think about soul or my soul, there's if you're not turned off by the religious connotation, and that we're talking about something very precious. These days, when we think about our countries, our nations, and we usually, as you were saying, feel that we're kind of beyond that, And I think the power of this work is to re-engage with this consciously, and also to really begin to reflect on ways in which we are an expression of the soul and the shadow of our own culture. Mm. And it's a very important, it can be a kind of awakening. I mean, as he said, you have to experience it. That experience is an awakening. That there is this a dimension that is rooted, as he said, the soul is something that is rooted to the absolute, and it's also rooted to our shared destiny as a collective, or as a national collective.
In fact, I found that moment in the conversation with Wolfgang a very powerful one that really stayed with me. And we asked him why he's using the word soul and not talking about national identity, which he also could talk. And he was making this point that soul refers to something deeper than identity, that's related to something that you could call absolute, whatever you want to call it, but I think he used the word absolute, because there's a depth realization of identity, and we're talking about personal and group nation identity, but in relationship to something absolute, mysterious, that is also related to this sense that there's something where there's no separation, and to see that even our collective identity can be related to that and can have a soul quality, allows us to think about the different qualities that different cultures developed in a sense to this wholeness. That allows me to really think from every part of the globe, there are contributions and angles to understand the depth of our humanity, from this wholeness and also from this specific angle these cultures come from, which allows me to think about, let's say, the Central European angle, because as Wolfgang said it, I liked it also very much when I asked him how he defines a nation or what makes a nation, and he had a very simple explanation. What creates a nation is a shared destiny. A shared destiny that the people who have, through a shared history and through a shared expectation of a shared future, some form of identity that creates something that if you use a spiritual term, you can call karma in the positive sense and the problematic sense. And then you see that a region, let's talk about my region, Central Europe, has a very specific journey through time in the last 3,000 years, let's put it that way. From the Romans, from the medieval times, or from the birth of modernity, from modernity itself, from the two world wars that all happened in this territory, and from the Iron Curtain and the separation in East and West Europe. There's a certain history that creates a certain quality that is just very different than Brazil. That's very different than the Philippines.
Different from America.
Different from America. And there are certain qualities that can flower in this, and certain qualities that have it hard. Talking about America and Central Europe, this can-do quality that we just talked before about, which is so much part of the American.
Maybe I should say that. Yeah, I was saying that one of the things that when Wolfgang and Soleil did the exercise with us, that came to my mind from as a positive aspect of American culture is this can-do quality. We can do, we can make something happen. We can do this. We can, change the world. We can, and there's a shadow to that can do is often blind to others, completely operating from self-interest. If you don't want to do what I can do, I will run you over. That was just what came up for me in that exercise. I'm sure if we did it again, something else would come up, because this is so multiply, there's so many different facets to this. But to recognize that's also not my personality. I'm a very can-do person, and there's positives of that, just like with the nation soul, and negative aspects of that. I tend to be impatient. It's like, come on. But this can-do quality was part of what won the Second World War.
Exactly. And on the other side, the Central European, and here specifically the German or Germanic Austrian quality, is a very overcritical quality. Because out of our own history and political, military, and moral failing, there is a tendency to really question everything, to question yourself, and to really look everywhere. Where's the hidden part of this story? Where's the thing which in itself has also a quality, because it really allows you to think deep and not stay with the surface. And that's part of the philosophical strength of this culture, because this goes much further back than the 20th century, and there's a lot to say about this, which in itself developed something. I think a lot of the philosophical strength that came out of Central Europe had to do with very specifics of the shared history of Central Europe history. And without going into this, this is something that creates a certain way of being human that is different, that doesn't have the same can-do quality, but it has a deep reflection quality about things.
Yeah. Which the Americans don't have, which is very rare in America, to have that level of self-reflection or self-criticism that would lead one to hesitate to do something. In some ways it's like, well, let's just do it anyway and see what happens. And that attitude has destroyed cultures and civilizations on this planet. The haste to act has saved Europe at one point, and it's also ended up destroying. We're living with that right now, and the whole planet is suffering from that right now. And we're just picking on small qualities, but I found it very extraordinary and fascinating that to bring this aspect of our individual self understanding, to not simply look at ourselves as individuals, but to be able to begin to look at the places where places and ways that our national soul and shadow live within us, that we are not separate from that, and to also begin to look at our nations and what is it that they are evolutionarily positioned to do that would create a context for world soul, because that's also where he was directing us to look, to think about what role does my culture and nation have, and therefore what work can I do that could bring us to a different integration. And as he said one. I mean, what I see in the United States is that there's, and this is just my lens on the United States. There are others from other places, other embodiments of this, but that he said that America was quite an experiment in a forced melding of cultures, and yet again this kind of, we would say in America, kind of in American English, we've run roughshod over the Native Americans. What happened as a result of slavery is really, there has not been any kind of soul work done in America to respond to the trauma of slavery, to respond to the trauma of genocide, to respond to the trauma that created by the Irish, the Italians when they came to America and were treated like, and were often enslaved. The Scottish people who were enslaved also. There's quite a history in America that was an evolution. It can be seen as Wolfgang was holding it, as an evolutionary experiment about cultures coming together. However, the atoning for what happened historically in relationship to that, I would say the United States is very far behind in that, in any kind of real recognition of that.
Yeah. And maybe just making a very simple example about learning from each other. Because it made such an impression in me that I never forgot in my life. When I went in the 1980s the first time to the Philippines, which was my first longer visit in the country of the Global South, and I experienced there this soul felt positivity to life. I still remember very vividly how much I was ashamed to be European, because I just knew the different level of standard of life and wealth, and seeing a nation of people who was really struggling at that time with dictatorship and the whole people's movement, and just to see a completely different relationship to hardship and struggling, and comparing this with our own identity is something which was a real shock for me. And we could go through our experiences in different countries in parts of the world and see how there are qualities there that if we bring them into communication, into dialogue with each other, there is something that really can come alive in the richness of what a global humanity is about. That maybe is a new dimension of developing a world soul.
It's interesting you say that, because I felt the same way in going to India for the first time. Being in India and seeing children literally, playing in the dirt, and yet with such luminosity in their eyes, and such a sense of joy and freedom and lightness, and and realizing that a comparable group of children in America would be don't have that aliveness. They don't have the aliveness and that kind of luminous quality in the eyes. There's something on, and one recognizes. I mean, this may be, as you said, being ashamed of being European. You recognize a certain a self-indulgence, in relation to what other cultures and peoples have, and what they're paying attention to.
Exactly. Maybe just to bring another example in the other direction. When I went in the 1990s for a couple of years to California, coming directly from Vienna, that there were many things that hit me at the time in San Francisco, but one thing that really stayed, in particular coming from Vienna, which really took me by surprise, the freedom of history.
Freedom from history.
Freedom from history. All of a sudden, I felt a lightness of the newness of this country, and part of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything is possible spirit, that with the, particularly a city like Vienna, which is so full, or basically it's a living museum in its always beauty, whatever, but it's a living museum. You feel the weight of hundreds and thousands of years in this, and then you come to San Francisco, and the old historic buildings out of 1920 or something like that, and the whole spirit. I fell in love with California in a way which really caught me by surprise, because I could see how this is a so different soul relationship to being alive, and I felt the superficiality also quite so. So it had many sides, but to see how we form different ways of being human because of our different history.
And to think also about in some ways what we've learned, what is it that we therefore have to bring is, what do we have to bring to each other in a global context, and I think how different ways, I think we'll get to this at another point, but just to kind of bring it up now, how different assumptions and different soul relationships to being a human being, growing out of a certain soil and context historically, how our different identities, our different soul structures and shadows have also had an impact on each other. It's like, as I was saying, like the American can-do-ness and the blindness in that, the shadow side of that has had an impact on, across the world. It's, how do we see that the interactions between the constructs of soul and shadow, how do they relate to each other? Because not a culture that has been colonized for hundreds of years has its own work to do. And in order to, as Anine, as you were saying in our last call, to kind of shed the habit of victimization for its own soul strength, and that habit of victimization came out of very real circumstances of colonization, and that's not your fault, and that the other side of that created that the impulse to colonize, etc. That's a different kind of shadow.
Yeah, and just to see how this is also part of what makes our soul. Because to bring one last example, it also had a big impact when I was in Russia, and I visited outside of Moscow the defense line of the Russian 1941 against the Germans, just outside of Moscow, and just being there, basically you could see already the Kremlin from there, and that's where the German tanks got stopped. And I wasn't part of this war in the East with Russia, but knowing what happened, I couldn't separate myself from this. So just to
you mean where millions of people died of starvation?
I mean 20 million Russian died in the Second World War. So this is part of my identity, that because of my culture background, it wasn't me, but because of something that came out of a culture that also created me, the Russian culture lost 20 million people.
Mm.
And,
Exactly.
and just to see this, also this is part of, when we're talking about finding together as a world soul, if we don't see that, this is part of our collective shadow.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And this is our work to be ethical, responsible global citizens.
And we somehow have to hold this together if we want to become one global humanity, one global family. In that sense, we have to hold the wealth of it. We also have to hold the tragedy of it. And we have to see that we're coming from different sides of this global story. And more than ever, we have to hold it together.
And which again is why this this point of prior unity is so important. That it has to be held together because there is only one. It's not like half of this planet can say, you guys really have messed up and we're moving our own way. There isn't we're here together. And so even on that sort of plain material level of being on one planet, that's one dimension of reality that this comes up against, but also in a deeper sense of being one in spirit, you could say, one part of one extraordinary, complex, often creative and destructive process of evolution. That we're one, and we're one at a heart consciousness level. There is one consciousness that holds all of this, and the deeper we can deeper and wider we can be in ourselves, the more we can hold and the more we can engage together from without having to skip over things in order to be, quote, positive or forward moving. That would be a very American way, but to be able to have the depth and seriousness from which to be able to hold all of this in a very heartfelt way, or in a way that actually touches us at a soul level. Okay, I think that's okay. Then I think from here, what we would like to do is to hear from you, questions, comments, anything about your groups, anything you want to share, and then at the end we'll give some more instructions about your next groups, and see where we go from there. Yeah, Anine, we'll open up your mic.
Yeah, Anine.
Thank you. I'd like to start because I might not be able to finish the whole session. I will just start the recording. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Just a minute. I think I have to put my mic. I am encouraged to talk because I'm inspired to hear that Thomas was in the Philippines. It's great to meet you now again, brother. So it's very interesting how things work.
That's right.
From our life experiences that we meet each other now. And by the way, I don't know if you know, that young man over there in the Philippines is my son. Hello, Angelo.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So see, we are one family now together, and I'm so excited to see you all. You know, it's like we're sitting in one living room together and talking. So not everything that humans have created are bad, right? Technology has really brought us together. I'd just like to say that this whole course until now has given me much inspiration to learn about prior unity and to learn about this world soul is a lot of healing for my own soul, coming from a country that suffered so much from our history. And I just turned 61 and will soon be 62 this year. So I'm excited to see this new world that is coming into life. As a child, I was a simple Filipina Catholic growing up in a very protected environment. My parents were very, very Catholic, so it was the only truth that I know. And my father as a soldier was very nationalistic. But my mother went to different countries and she would always bring me dolls from different nations. And then I would get gifts and cards and books from her friends from different countries. Most of the books I could not understand, but I enjoyed the pictures. So when I was an activist, hating everything that was white, I think this prior unity kept following me because I still had in my heart the love from these friends from different countries. And what I'm saying is now that I hear about prior unity and this world soul, I think it means that it cannot go wrong. The world cannot go wrong because this prior unity will not leave us. Like our heartbeat that is always there. It's our original nature. And I like to share an experience with my little granddaughter. She's just 5 years old. In one incident early this year when there was a big hatred again rising against the Muslims. And it's a long story. It's about the political manipulation that the Muslims were again being blamed for a tragedy. When my granddaughter heard about it, she was very angry and she was talking with her hands on her waist and saying that cannot be possible. They cannot say bad things about Muslims because they are my friends. And because we were always bringing her to peace camps, it was very natural for her that everybody was her friends and she could not understand all this division. So I think this is an example of the purity of a human being that recognizes prior unity. The children who are very clear about being friends to everybody. They have no division. And after Typhoon Haiyan, when you had this exercise with Soleil and Peter again did it with us, I saw that the quality that I like most about our country is what we saw after Typhoon Haiyan. Everybody was commending the Filipinos after such a big tragedy. This quality to still be happy. Thomas, you were talking about it. It's really unbelievable. The tragedy happened in early November, but soon after they were already putting up Christmas decorations. You know, they had no food, they had no home, but they were still very happy to look forward to Christmas. I call it loving joy because our capacity also to have compassion for everybody. And many people were saying the victims, the Filipinos didn't have anything, but they still shared with each other. And this is how we rise up from every tragedy. But as I said, our darkness is this continuing to be victims. So I think my role now as a Filipino elder, but still very young in my heart, is to bring young people together from the Philippines, from all over the world, to have this living dialogue not anymore as victim and victimizer, but as partners.
Mm.
And I have tried to instill this in my children. And I'm very proud that my son is over there starting his own bridges with people from all over the world. And I think this is all we have to do to really find this, whatever windows are there to bring back this prior unity. We have nowhere to go, but just to go back to it. Because this long history of blaming each other and hurting each other is really over.
Right.
And that's what my little angel is telling us. It's not possible because we are all brothers and sisters. I just like to share one more story that brings me hope. We deal with Muslims and Christian and indigenous young people in the Philippines. And in 2009, Aduna, our indigenous leader, we were talking about our core hurt, each of the groups in the Philippines. And she told of the story that in the beginning, her people were so attached to their drums. They called the community through their drums. That was their music. That was their call for prayer. That was their call for an assembly. But then soon the Muslims came with their gongs. And so the gongs became more powerful than the drums. And then later the Christians came with the bells. And at that time, we were in a monastery and the bells of the monastery were ringing. And it came back to her and she was really crying. The hurt that they lost their drums because of the gongs and the bells. Last year, I was able to bring her here in Europe. And when she was in Lucerne, she met Catholic pastoral workers, and they showed a picture of, in the past, the pastoral workers went to countries and just ran over the religion of the natives. And they do not want to do this now. And hearing this, she was so touched, she went to the front crying and said, now I meet the people who have colonized my people. And I am touched to hear so much love from you. And now we can begin again. And we can heal the history and be brothers and sisters. So I just like to leave these two stories, my granddaughter and Aduna, that there is hope. This world soul can really continue to come out. It's coming out through beautiful people in front of me now in one living room. That's all I want to share.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anine. Diana?
Yes, we had somebody in our group that was going to have to call in rather than use Zoom, and they were wondering how you would recognize them because they thought they wanted to ask a question. And I told them I'd ask.
Yeah, you all right. I just forgot that.
So they're just on the telephone and don't have a screen in front of them.
Where are they?
I don't know if they're on. It was Uli, and she was going to have to call in, but she.
Yes, I saw her. I saw her there, and she's not there now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a combination of it's a combination on her phone, but I don't know it by heart right now. As soon as she's on, she's not on right now, as I see, because otherwise I would have unmuted her. But I have to admit right now I can't. I don't know by heart basically what you have to do on your phone, but I will look it up. And if she calls back to you, I just let me know. Then I will unmute her anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question or comment? Margot? Margot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had our group this morning. We just had our small dialogue this morning, and something came up that I had never really thought about before, and it just really caught my attention. We started talking about deep pride.
Mm.
You know, pride is such a no-no. You know, it's like the worst thing you can do is to have pride, at least the way I was understanding it. And we started talking about deep pride without arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
That's just like, wow. And to me, and I feel about myself, you know, like we would have deep pride in our culture, we'd have deep pride in our original, deep pride in ourselves, and not be arrogant about it. I just thought that was worth mentioning to bring up, because I don't know that that's been discussed. Sometimes I notice with a change in perspective, what was a primary value at one level of the perspective changes to be, you know, the worst thing, and all of a sudden maybe a value. The other thing I wanted to say was when you were talking, Tom, about the war. My sister, I didn't see this, but my sister said when she went to visit Hiroshima, they have a memorial there. They actually have the shadows of the people, you know, that were captured on cement when the bomb fell. And that just moved me so much. So I don't know, I mean, I don't know what decisions were around the war, what was right or wrong, but I know that really moved me. And that was something to consider as moving forward with the culture, that was the one to drop that bomb, just to create the shadows of the people in midday.
No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's something I would like to say about what you call this deep pride, because it is something that I talk quite a bit already over the years with Wolfgang, both of us being German-Austrian, he German, me Austrian, and there's something, of course, in the German history, in the German karma, where it's not easy to say you're proud to be German.
Right.
And in fact, that's a big part of the postmodern identity of being German. That basically you more or less hate it, at least to some degree. Usually there's something underneath also. It's not the whole, it's the whole truth. But what you're referring to, and Germany may be an extreme example for this, but it's true for all nations. If there's not a deep yes of who we are, not just personally, but also culturally, there's no way to bring to flower the qualities of what this culture is, and it only can be brought to flower through us, to the people. So if we are not owning it, which means to see what are these qualities? What are these qualities that came in from this corner of the planet, and that corner of the planet, and that corner of the planet, and every one of us comes from a specific corner. And even if we would be a completely globalized citizen, that doesn't erase our roots. I always, even if I would be as globalized as I can be, I will come from Austria, period. And there's a certain relationship. And if I want to be someone who contributes to our global culture, I also have to own where I come from, because otherwise I cannot own being Chinese, because I'm not Chinese, period. So that, I think, is a big part of why Wolfgang also developed this interest in the nation soul. Because this is a very difficult thing for Germanic people to do at these times. But we have to develop this in order to come together on a global scale. Because if we say, it's the same with American, if postmodern Americans are very anti-American, and basically
we are,
and just hate their country,
right?
I'm not saying not to be critical about one's country, but if you hate it in a way that you're in denial of who you are, you cannot be an expression of what this country could be. so that's what I find is the power of what Wolfgang was talking about, the nation soul, that we have to own that in the most positive way. And of course, this means also, and again, maybe as a German, I'm in a good position, or Germanic, a good position, you also have to own your own shadow. Because otherwise, you're in denial, and you create nationalism out of this.
Right.
Yeah. I was quite touched by when Wolfgang said that he was first doing this exercise or trying to look at nation soul in Oroville, in India, and that he and the other Germans were like, there isn't anything good here, and then he had this flash of a landscape of just beauty. And that broke something in him. And I think I think it's very, very powerful to realize that one can't do healing by only looking at the negative. That doesn't end up healing. You end with a void then. But that part of the healing process is a reclaiming and a renewed, as you were saying, deep pride or deep yes about the positive attributes of one's national culture, without letting go of the truth of the shadow. And again, these things are, and we've talked about this a lot, and we're going to have one module that's specifically devoted to this. We're talking about, and Wolfgang said this to us, I think, in our pre-call, this is a different consciousness. The consciousness that allows us not to just flip back and forth between positive and negative, or just sort of dig into the negative and ignore the rest. But the consciousness that allows us to hold diversity and unity, that allows us to hold the positive and the negative in a depth, in ourselves, in our awareness, is a different integration of consciousness. It's an integral consciousness that holds more of the picture than what we're usually in, and it's a development of consciousness that allows us to do that, and to do that together gives us even more depth and breadth, and I think sort of appreciation and resonance with something that even goes beyond, that becomes a world soul.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Carol, I think you had, and then we'll get to Manon and Marianne.
I've got a couple of different points here that I want to mention. The first one is that on the basis of my experience, moving between cultures brings out, I think, a sense of soul. It's sort of almost like we are in a process, because we are moving between cultures, we're starting to recognize that there's something different. And my experiences, I grew up in Canada, and my brother-in-law was teaching on an Indian reserve in the north of British Columbia, and about 500 kilometers north of the border to United States. When I entered this village, a small village with 13 photo poles at the entrance, telling the stories of this village, and then going into the school and having various experiences in this village, I think that was my first unconscious experience with soul culture. And I think that that did something to me for the rest of my life. And then I went to Asia as a volunteer, and there I recognized something that seemed familiar to me. And when I came to Central Europe, I had the feeling I've come home. And I found that very very, very strange. And I guess what I had been looking for is a place which didn't have a rationally formed soul, but an emotional soul, or I don't know what did Wolfgang call it again? He said France and America have a kind of a rationally formed soul, and then he listed Russia and Germany and China and so on, and said they have a soul culture or a soul nation. And I guess we have different levels to which we link up in this question. That was the one point. That another thing. I think I'll just leave this whole question of foreigners and having to do with the German soul. It's a bigger question. There's just I'll mention one other point that I'm very worried or concerned about at the moment, because I have a feeling that actually there's also a struggle between creating uniformity versus soul awareness in the world. And I think that cannot really be underestimated. I experience this very strongly, for example, in Turkey, where my daughter is living. And my son-in-law is from there, is a Kurd. The advancement of consumerism, shopping malls, and then as a more and more superficial Islam in connection with that. It's quite shocking, and you really get this feeling. And I experienced Turkey 30 years ago, and it was a totally different place. It's a totally different cultural emanation. And this is something that we also have to think about, I think. It's a real tough thing, that cultures are just being eliminated from for a lot of people, and they're into some sort of consumerist urban, just transported into a consumerist urban place where there's very little left of or very little chance to experience soul. I just wanted to bring that point in.
I think what you're saying, Carol, is actually very true, and it's something that I think we talked about early on about. It's something that Habermas speaks about in terms of the system world versus the life world. That the system world of the global economy, consumerism, this kind of materialistic culture, that the corporate culture, whatever, is very dangerously colonizing every aspect of human life, and more across the globe. And that, I think that's we see our work as trying to create living, life worlds that have this kind of this soul quality.
I just wanted to point out the danger that we are surrounded in. It really has moved so fast in the last 10, 20, 25 years. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And we have to consider that also somehow in our work.
Yeah.
We have to consider it, and I see it as one of. I'm really grateful that you brought this up, because I think this is one of the main reasons for the need of a global dialogue like we try to create here.
Yes.
Because it's not about a uniform globalization. Because if we create a uniform world globalization where we're all just part of Facebook, Google, McDonald's, and all the cliches, we lose who we are.
Right.
At the same time, there is also the danger to have an anti-response and basically just have a reactionary, close the borders, let's just be Austrian, which is happening in Austria like in many other countries. Complete denial, which is which won't happen anyway. There's no chance we won't globalize.
Right.
But it is a kind of a fearful response to globalization, but also to see there's a good part in this also. We have to find a way where we hold the global reality of who we are and deeply honor the roots, our regional roots. Only that the richness of human culture can survive and develop new forms of living. And it hasn't done before. Because, I mean, what we're doing right now, talking in this Zoom conversation, just 5 years ago has not been possible in this way. So we are creating new culture, and there is a kind of a tendency that everything becomes just global in that sense. And there is a young generation who is growing up in this Facebook world and is mostly relating to that. And there's a danger of globalization without really honoring the roots, which I would say the soul of your nation or the soul of your culture.
Yeah.
And we have not been in this situation before, so we are the ones who have to find answers that don't exist yet.
Right.
So this conversation I understand as a shared exploration. How can we do both at the same time? Because I'm deeply convinced we need to do both at the same time. Then we develop the richness of what it means to be human in all its different facets. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great. Manon? Wait, I'm trying to unmute you. Okay. Start over?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I have a question. So I'm just going to go back to the identity of our soul nation. And maybe that comes because in our group this afternoon, I realized that the one thing that was very present to me was actually I'm Canadian, but I'm French Canadian. So there's kind of this subculture, within Canada of French and English, and also the Native Canadians. But so how could I put this? It brought me to the reflection or asking myself how important it is for me to find, to be rooted really in this soul culture, to find out or to recognize, acknowledge the positive aspect of my culture and the negative or the shadow aspect. From my perspective, I know that I have the glasses of being a French Canadian. So it's just one subculture of my nation, right? So, yeah, I find this interesting. And then it brings me question. I mean, it's not clear like a German. And also, I realize also reflecting between my call and this one now, let's say 20 years ago, we have in Canada the 1st of July is the Canadian Day, and the 23rd of June is the Quebec Day. It's, French and English have their own day of celebration. And so on the Canadian Day, it's mainly English, or has been like this. So on that 1st of July, you would see outside in the street the Canadian flag, the red flag, everybody in red, English speaking going in the street. On the 23rd of June, blue Quebec flag and French speaking and so on. That was 20 years ago. Now it's all kinds of nation going down in the street, either on the 23rd of June or on the 1st of July. Okay, so it evolved also.
Interesting.
So I was wondering, I asked myself, what is my soul nation? French, if I talk from 20 years ago, or now it's like, well, it's a bunch of people together, this is the special thing now, I'm identified with a certain part of me. Yes, I'm French Canadian, but at the same time, a complete open I'm just a little part, the French Canadian are just a little part in this big soup of multinational, So that brought the question, I identify to what? Is it to me personally, so being French Canadian, or so how important to recognize which aspect of my soul nation I see and I identify with.
Well, I think this is where Wolfgang's and Soleil's instructions to look at it subjectively, to really to think about, like, when I think of my country, my roots, where does it resonate in my body? That in terms of not intellectualizing this to start with, to come at it from a different rootedness in yourself. And so if your first identification, your first thought is, thing that kind of comes forward is French Canadian, then I would go into that and not go French Canadian, and then think about it too much to get that kind of spins you a little bit out of, out of connection to yourself, because that French Canadian came up first, but.
If I may, this French Canadian thing it's a conditioned thing, because I remember going in school growing up, I have learned to hate the English speaking. I didn't hate them. It was my neighbor was English and we were speaking together, playing together. But once you go to school, you learn to hate the English because that's the way it is, So I was really thinking this is a conditioned part of me.
But all of them are.
Yeah.
They all are. All of it is a deeper layer of our conditioned humanity that produces and evokes different qualities of being human. And they come with they come with baggage as well as with jewels, if you will.
Absolutely.
And what I really liked about Wolfgang's description is that he said it's a kind of shared destiny, because it's not a metaphysical reality. What a nation is. It's a nation is something that exists through our also intentions, who we want to be. So we are creating what nations are. I mean, I very much understand you from the other way around, because can you please tell me who I am? Am I German or am I Austrian? Is it different or is it the same? 90% of the Austrians, no, not 90, 70% of, no, 80% something of the Austrians will tell you that the most important part of the Austrian identity is that they are not German. I also can tell you which year they came to this thought.
I think it's important by sharing this here. It's like, okay, well, I think what comes up also as a nation, when I look at my nation, Canada, it's still there. It's this wound, from French and English from Europe that came to Canada and brought that war from Europe to us, is still pretty much to feel from our French Canadian to English Canadian speaking. Well, especially in the East, let's say, but West, I don't know.
Because sometimes it's just not easy sometimes it's easier to identify with a nation because the shared destiny is very clear. Sometimes between the French Canadian and the English Canadian, it gets complicated. What shared destiny and what's the opposite of shared destiny here? So also to see this is part of the reality also. Are they Pakistani Indian or not? Just because they're Muslim?
But I think just a last note that the Prime Minister that we have right now, that he's giving so much time of healing or reeling the relationship with the Native Americans of Canada. seems to bring, for me, there's a sense that I sense more of a wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't see much more difference between me, French and English, but now it's more, he represent both of them towards a third one, which is the Native Canadian, indigenous.
Yeah.
And this is where it seems to unite. I have the sense it's uniting something. Yeah.
Well, your new prime minister seems to be aware of in some way and willing to do soul work for Canada, and that's actually quite extraordinary.
Absolutely. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Actually, should we mute you back, Manon? How do we? And then open just a second, just 1 second. Yeah, we're gonna open your mic. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
This goes back a while, but in fact it's been picked up by several of the speakers. If the cultural soul is damaged or ill-formed or rejected, does that have an effect on being able to be a part of the world soul? Manon said something very interesting, is that when the healing work with the Native Canadians was taking place, she began to feel, I forgot the word you said, but something more apart, or part of the world soul, or at least Canadian soul.
Yeah.
I wonder, what is the connection? Or is there a connection? It seems so.
I think so. I think it's even almost, if you think about yourself, oneself, and if one is traumatized or suffering a great deal from unresolved conflict, et cetera, it's like your capacity to participate wholly and productively, and I mean productively in a wholesome sense, in a forward, positive sense in conversation and in relationship and so forth is somehow limited, which is why we want to work through these things. But I think it is the same. I think think about the United States is not until the United States deals with its own inner traumas. I don't know that it is ever going to be a reliable player on the world stage. It's like until America faces what it is that it's done, within its own borders, and created those borders. There's something that's being denied to such a degree that the fundamental trustworthiness isn't there.
And that applies to the individual as well.
I would think so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Joya had a question. Okay.
I just wanted to respond to Manon because I thought, I feel like I'm Bavarian, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Because there's a lot of noise. I'm Bavarian and I'm German as well. And maybe you're not Quebec or English Canadian, but you're both somehow. I don't know. I'm not a Canadian, and I'm just getting very excited about seeing which different soul bodies I have, like my family soul, my Bavarian soul, my German soul, my European soul, and my world soul, and many, many others.
That's right.
Like a new world opening up.
That's very cool.
Great. Yeah, I mean, we don't. For many of us, and I mean, there are people, for example, whose parents were refugees and moved from Russia to America, and their parents were Russian, and now that or from, you think about now, from Syria to Germany, It's like, what will, in 20 years, someone growing up in that context, they will be Syrian and German. You know, it's how, it isn't necessary to find one only, but to actually look at the different resonances within ourselves, the different soul components that we're made up out of. And from even engaging with some of these differences within ourselves I think can open up something that to a deeper world soul. And I think it's very important to do this work. And earlier I was reminded of this on the One World Rising webcast that we did. Rajan Venkatesh spoke very powerfully about realizing that you can't really be someone who can reach authentically and give globally in a global context without having deeply rooted oneself. That if you want to be able to reach wide into the world, that your roots have to be deep. And that doesn't mean that one's roots have to be deep in just one nation, but one has to have, as we were saying, have this a kind of a depth of yes, and an awareness of the limitations or the shadows, and taking responsibility for both. Thanks, Joya. Laura? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So a few things came up for me, and I'm glad you just mentioned the refugees. I was actually at a symposium for 2 days, and we were talking about the refugees, and some refugees, Syrian refugees spoke, and are just different refugees from different backgrounds, and some of the things that they talk about. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, was that in the United States?
Yes, it was in Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. And some of the things that came up was just that, not really having a specific nation, being born in a refugee camp of a different country, and and then moving to a different country and living there for a great period of time, and then so kind of not being able to own some specific nation. I think it's kind of what happens is it's kind of an all. So it's like a none and an all. And I think that allows to have a greater perspective, like what was said earlier. I know for me, I also moved around in Italy and in the US and different parts of the US. And for me, that also gave me that ability to kind of have like a global passport in a way, not having a specific place that I really knew was home. But the other thing that came up for me, because I think that as we move into this greater expansion, it's like those two things always happening simultaneously, connecting with that prior unity, and also connecting with my history as a person, and in the environment that I'm living in. Like as an American, I want to own and embody, this nation's history, and also perhaps my Italian history. And then I feel it expand to, all nations and countries. When I was saying this to my group, it's like the suffering of others. And I know that I'm a therapist, so I think that maybe I think this way, but it's like, I feel like, it's like they're all my brothers and sisters. So I have that felt experience of the grief of another. And then I was thinking, because we were talking about the deeper pride that Margot had brought up. And I think that at a human level too, there's a deeper pride that can turn to an arrogance on the other hand, where we are neglectful of the animals and of the earth. And I think that that's something that, you know, it comes up, and, you know, when we make these changes like cage free and, you know, like trying to make these little changes, but at the same time, there's a deep suffering and pain that I experience, and I think many of us experience, of the, you know, the vast, you know, massacring that we're doing of our land, of animals. And I think that that's going to be something that we're going to tackle as we expand our world soul experience.
I think you're very right. I think you're very right about that. That experiencing the grief and loss in relationship to what we've done, what we've allowed to happen, I think is going to be a big part of probably our recognizing that we're really part of one world.
And you're raising a very important question. If you're talking about a world soul, do we only mean a human world soul? Is it really true that the world soul is just human? That doesn't really make sense to me. But if you open this up, you open up a lot. Well, what is a world soul that is not just human? What does prior unity mean if we include that?
Exactly. That's why I think that when we truly get to that place, you know, we aren't just the human body, where we embody, you know, everything that there is. You know, like even all of the constructions, even everything that's, you know, that's built, I think makes us so super conscious of our deep connections with everything that, you know, it's a beautiful and painful experience.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Angelo, you have I think what will end up being our last comment. Just a second, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
You're okay.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I just would like to express first and foremost and gratitude and to everyone. I mean, I'm so inspired with all the sharing and how it's going, the direction that we're going now with Lara, including a bigger dimension, including the land, you know, not just humanity as part of the world soul, the nation soul, just really so incredible for me. And at the same time, it's so phenomenal. That's what made the whole discussion really amazing, is how there's these two dimensions into it. And first and foremost, I also would like to be thankful for your generosity for allowing me to sleep the last time.
Bless you.
I really found it fun just to see the video when I got the video.
We hope you wouldn't feel bad about that. Good.
No. I just felt more peaceful being with you while I was there in another dimension, you know, and I guess.
I hope everyone appreciates that it's 2 and 3 in the morning for you.
Yeah. But I was I slept as early as 7 p.m., you know, so I'm now really energized. And I just also was amazing to re-experience the exercise. And I also remember Joya talking about how, you know, this connecting to what Manon shared about their having this, you know, personal identities or national identities that are dual in a way, or multiple. And I got reminded also about how I am, you know, from another perspective as a Filipino, with my mother being 1/4 Spanish, and my father also being of Chinese descent. You know, our heritage actually just like a surname adapted. It was originally a Chinese surname, but my great-grandfather had it converted to Spanish.
Wow.
So have more commercial leverage during that time. And, you know, but my spirituality is indigenous. I'm closer to the spiritual, this indigenous spirituality that we have in the Philippines, and my accent is American. So amazing to experience this diversity in terms of soul, national identity, a national soul identity. And it's because of the phenomenon known as colonialization, how it's perceived, because well, the Chinese started trading with us and like did it through economic interaction. And our history with the Spaniards, of course, was through our religion, through Catholicism, and it was 300 years of that. And then the American colonial, through education, occupation of the Philippines still exists until now. And I guess, and this reminds me of how our small group dialogue also went with Michael facilitating it very well. And I was sharing about how I went through the exercise that Soleil facilitated again, and how I was connected to this quality, this soul quality of openness that we Filipinos, I think, develop, this embracing openness of being open to different cultures. And I guess it's also the reason why Filipinos can live anywhere in the world. We have nurses, workers, skilled workers and companions all over the world and are able to adapt because of this openness that was developed. But I guess on the flip side, it also becomes our shadow with our openness becomes like this, develops into this individualism that is coming from being carried away by other people's culture and being unrooted. And speaking of what Wolfgang was saying, I found what he said to be incredible about evolution also having as its goal developing integration on the national soul level. And at the same time, the national soul integrating into the world soul after finding out its own unique contribution. I find it really amazing about integration in different levels.
Right.
I've been doing our small group interaction, and I guess I may share that Michael, he shared this experience as an American who was an immigrant from Germany. I mean, as a German and then as an American. And his story of his, he called it white guilt. I mean, his struggles and also the beauty of what he went through, his experience, like also produced this immense atmosphere for me of healing and reconciliation, of integration, of me integrating with this experience from another perspective, with my experience of having this, I don't want to call it colonialization, but I guess it's also some sort of integration, but it just so happened to happen in that way, in the fashion that I guess it was what Wolfgang was saying, that was part of the process. And now, again, this integration that will be happening on the individual level, and that's what I found also very amazing with Wolfgang sharing, the emphasis on the individual soul, its role, as what Elizabeth said, about the engagement of the national and the world soul being on the individual level, and the role of the individual soul. And in the spirituality that I'm trying to live with and live by, we have this concept of unit of consciousness, about each individual being that, and about how the universal consciousness would have an experience of reality through units of consciousness, was just deeply resonating for me. It was that's why it was so phenomenal. Just listen to the lecture again, and what was happening, and hearing the recap and all the sharing. So again, my question, just I guess that I would like to leave, because I like how who's that said about culture. Carol mentioned about cultures being like dominated because of this globalization, the other side of globalization, which is probably industrial and malls. And we have an experience of that here in the Philippines. But we also have experiences. I have this experience, this enlightening experience with a tribe here that uses their preservation, their cultural preservation as their way for preserving their land. Because they're being engaged by multinational companies, and the style of multinational companies is like urbanizing the tribe's people so that they can sell their lands. And in the end, the tribe are losing their lands and losing their culture also in the process. So I'm wondering if we can have a way, and I'm sure One World Rising is doing this already. I'm just wondering how we can connect so that stories of people like this, you know, cultures like this that need to be integrated to the national soul can be given space and can be brought into that level of the world soul, you know, so that more people can be aware of such phenomenon. And it's wonderful how this is unfolding. So
Thank you.
Actually, that's great, Angelo. I think that's also something to really take on much more consciously and really work with, because this phenomenon is happening all over the world, from South America, Central America, Hawaii, to through Africa. I mean, Africa, obviously, India. It really is. I mean, this is the system world that is the capitalist system world that is moving in this way, and there's starting to be a network happening of indigenous peoples who are learning from each other about ways of claiming their land as their religious location. You know, that the land is our people, our spirit, our religion. We can't wipe out our religion by taking our land. And there's in North America, also Canada, because after the United States gave the Native Americans the worst land on the continent of North America, recently there's been discovered, I think, natural gas reserves on a lot of the property, and of course, guess who wants to have a piece of that? But there's been a lot of really interesting activism and examples now happening and being shared across the world of how that are connecting this connection with Earth, and this priority of Earth as sacred, bringing that to a global level, which I think is really a very exciting and important phenomenon. But I also wanted to say that the Philippines is such an extraordinary example, because you have 7,000 islands, right? Something like that, and over 200 language groups,
dialects,
and that's your nation. I mean, that's already quite extraordinary.
Right. And I appreciate what Thomas was saying earlier about the positivism that you said, with the hardships and all. I guess I also would like again to just share how I appreciate the exercise that Soleil and Wolfgang introduced, because I know that attitude, the resilience of positivism, again, it connected me to this openness that I guess we Filipinos developed because of our interaction with the world, with everything, all those cultures that interacted with us. So I also want to thank you for that, Thomas. I mean, your visit to us also brought us the positivism. You know, the appreciation brought us to us as well. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Great. I think we should probably end it there. We're a little bit over time. So thank you all very much.
I will open up all mics.
We'll open the mics so that we can all say goodbye.
If I can do that. Here we are.
Okay.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Sylvia! Hey, I was cooking. Charlie's the name of the baby. Charlie? Charlie. He's sleeping. Bye-bye.
Bye. Much love to you.
Love to you too, Johan.